it's a pleasure to join. Long time listener, first time participant, I guess. Look, this campaign, the Labor Party has repeatedly denied any suggestion, any whisper there might be some secret plans to increase taxes. I think after today's front page in The Guardian, they're going to find that a lot more difficult. The Guardian's reporting, according to sources, senior sources within the Labor Party, and it's worth remembering here, The Guardian is a left-wing paper well connected to the Labor Party. They are reporting that there are plans afoot, there are policy papers going around about putting up capital gains tax in a way to increase 10 billion additional pounds, plans to change around inheritance tax, to put it on agricultural land, as well as removing certain business relief. And this, I think, raises some important questions because we know that there's a bit of an unspoken truth. There's a bit of a black hole in Labor's financial plans because on the one hand, they say they're not going to do any cuts. On the other hand, though, under the existing plans, if they don't do anything, there are £20 billion of cuts planned to departmental budgets. We also know that Labour Party have said we're not, in their manifesto, we're not going to raise VAT, we're not going to raise national insurance, we're not going to raise income tax, but they haven't said they're not going to raise taxes at all. So that actually does leave quite a lot open. So I suppose the question here is why, if there are plans afoot to raise taxes, are Labour not being honest about it prior to the election? Are they going to try to surprise us with some emergency budget after the election? What are their real kind of underlying intentions rather than what they're kind of saying to get elected here today? And I think that that's so important in the midst of an election campaign where Labour is so far ahead, where perhaps they actually could be truthful and they could put forward they could be honest with people and say, well, we want to increase spending and therefore we're going to put up your taxes. But they're refusing to do that. I suppose that this is really in some sense about trust, Benjamin, but I guess maybe someone coming from more the left side, you might say, we should put up these taxes, we should put up spending, that's entirely justified. Should they be more, I suppose, honest and open about this?
Well, if you go back to 2017, when Theresa May decided to be very open about her plans for funding social care, and it collapsed the public support. So I actually think, as a population, we're rather hypocritical in that we say, we want you to tell us what you're going to do, but then if politicians tell you what they're going to do, everyone says, oh, well, I'm not voting for that. Well, then you end up with a situation where politicians of any party are stuck in a corner with this. Now, Labour's manifesto has the smallest public spending plans. I think it's something like net of 6 billion more or something, which is less than the Tories and vastly less than the Green Party or Reform, which are pledging more than £120 billion of extra spending or cuts. So, you know, completely farcical. Now, you're right, there's a £19 billion gap in the sums, which says there'll have to be cuts of that description. But I don't think it's unique to the Labour Party to ask the question of how they're going to fund that. That same gap applies to the Tory plans. In fact, it's slightly bigger because they want to spend a bit more money in their manifesto.
But does anyone have any confidence whatsoever that Labour will actually stick to those parameters that they set out in their manifesto?
Can I just point out that taxes were lower under the last Labour government. Income tax was lower the entire time we had a Labour government than it has been under
the Tories. Since then, we locked down 3 times.
Yeah, but long before COVID came along, taxes were higher under the Tories than they were under Labour. And the only 2 occasions in the last 30 years VAT has gone up were both under Conservative governments.
But Benjamin, can I just pick up one thing? You've said there that if they're honest, the public go, oh, I'm not going to vote for you. But actually, the left tell us all the time that when we poll the public, they're more than happy to put an extra penny on the income tax to save the NHS. So those two things don't sit by side either.
Well, they don't, because, you know, when people answer questions in a poll, for example, they're not thinking in a holistic way. It's the same reason why, you know, Jeremy Corbyn will tell you that he had lots of policies that were popular individually, but when people look at them as a package, they think, well, you can't actually do it. I think you're seeing that with the Tories' approach. They keep saying they'll do all sorts of things, but no one believes them, and so it doesn't matter.
But the problem with Keir is he does keep saying, you're right, I'm not going to raise income tax, you know, national insurance and all of that on working people, with a very fine definition of what a working person is. But I listened to him the other night, and actually, when he was talking at great length in the Leader's individual interview, he said, what I'm not going to do is write the budget for the next 5 years. That's what he said. There's the answer.
Would it not be wise, actually, for Labour to not make any of these commitments about even VAT or national insurance or income tax, and not say that they have any specific plans to not raise taxes, and not try to give the impression they're not raising taxes? Because in some ways, actually, the problem is, if you completely rule out raising the three biggest sources of revenue, and they've actually said they're going to freeze corporate tax as well on top of that, then you have to start raising these other taxes that actually cause more economic problems. The reason why capital gains tax is low is you want to encourage investment. So if you start putting up capital gains a lot, then you can discourage investment.
Capital gains tax isn't even low in this country. I mean, it's akin to theft. There's a report out from Headley and Partners this week saying the UK is set to lose 9.5 million millionaires this year, second only to China, because they are so fearful about the incoming Labour government.
I mean, that's just nonsense.
What's nonsense?
Right, the idea that it's like, there are some private schools that closed. They tried to sell it's Labour's VAT on school fees plans, even though, I think hundreds of private schools have closed in the last 14 years.
The question is, how much can you keep
people aren't leaving this country because they think Labour will put their taxes up. People that have big investments and big money have been far more likely to leave the country because it's not a worthwhile place to invest in businesses. It's been a poor environment. And Liz Truss was the epitome of that.
You might be right, but if
no millionaire, or more importantly billionaire, because there are quite a lot of millionaires, no billionaire is going to stop being in Britain if they think they're going to make money out of the economy. The economy being mediocre is what will get them to leave.
Think their taxes are going
exactly.
then they're not
Loads of
going to
people
make
have been
money.
leaving the UK for years in order to set up business in other places. If you know you're about to sell your company, you relocate to Singapore, where you're not going to have to pay tax on it, and you make millions and millions more. It's a very simple calculation here, and more people will leave as you try and squeeze them more.
You are right, nothing works, and the economic environment isn't great, but at the same time, when you add increased capital gains tax, for example, on top of that, why would anyone stick around? You just go to Dubai, you go to the Middle East, you go to Qatar, where the sun shines, life is arguably better, they can probably get a train on time.
I kind of feel with that argument, Benjamin, you're almost there, you're almost with us, and then you say, but it's not Labour's fault. Well, it is. It's the fear of Labour and their tax and spending problems that are putting people
haven't
off.
been leaving the country for months because of a Labour government coming in. People really don't. People don't think like that. And also, I might point out,
how many millionaires do you know?
Well, lots, because I live in London. So most people that own a house could well be a millionaire in a hit.
No, proper millionaires, not just with equity in a house.
That's not how you define a millionaire.
I know probably half a dozen millionaires. At least 3 of them are moving to Dubai because they'll be taxed to the hill.
But people, middle-class people, let alone people who are poor and at the bottom, have had a really tough time. And the idea that your primary sympathy should be with millionaires moving to knock 5% off their tax by
you're saying that. You're saying the middle classes have had a really hard time.
Regular folk can't even afford to feed their kids at points in the last couple of years because bills have been extortionate.
I would agree the middle classes have had a really hard time, but they've shown what they're going to do to the middle classes by kicking private schools and independent schools. By the way,
not having going to private schools, they're upper middle class. They are a lot richer than the average.
People who are middle class who send their kids to private schools, actually.
Do you have £60,000 spare a year for 2 kids to go to private school?
I do not, but there are people...
Everybody has 2 kids.
Yeah, exactly.
A typical family has 2 kids.
No.
And the average private school fee is £15,500. These are not Middle England, and these are not people that I think a government should be worrying about first.
When I sent my son to private school, I lived on apples and yoghurt for a year because I couldn't afford anything but his school fees and
I've heard many stories. Parents remortgaging their houses.
Look, that illustrates the problem. You think you're hard done by because you had to have less food. But the vast majority of people in this country, there is no amount of apples and yoghurt they could live off that would give them 15.5 grand spare for private school fees.
OK, we're going to have to leave that there.
You're not a squeezed middle, and those should not be the people that a government worries about.
Yes, you are.
No,
Class warfare, Benjamin Butterworth strikes again. But still to come.